Hello, everyone, and welcome to another really wonderful episode of the Atomic Podcast. I have today someone who, one, I deeply respect, and also I'm really excited to have on the program, John McElligott. And John has this unique background. One, he's an entrepreneur. Two, he's been very invested in AI as advocacy, but also technically. And he really has this I'll say sensibility and background really coming from a missionary family as well. So his mission in AI is something that I think we so need more to kind of ground it in people's real lives, and also to be able to use AI to build communities, build bonds between us, as opposed to seeing those bonds separated and seeing lots of people, particularly younger people, really kind of go off into these areas in which it's quite destructive to their mental health, but also really to just their perspective on life in general. So, John, I want to turn it over to you for background, and super happy you're here, man.
Thank you very much, Rodney. It's always a pleasure. I love when we get a chance to talk, and by the time we're done, we're like, why didn't we record it? So we're doing it.
So, yeah,
Awesome.
take it away. I mean, I think one of the things that's so interesting to me is we can people talk about passion all the time, but you come from a family and certainly a perspective of passion that's very grounded. And I wanted you to talk a little bit about that.
Yeah, so it's an interesting question. So, because, for me, passion and purpose are these two things together, and sometimes passion starts to go away, but the purpose doesn't. Like it's that gnawing thing. Passion you've got to feed sometimes, but the purpose is the thing you can't get rid of no matter what happens. And so, as an entrepreneur, and I'm not super pumped about that specific term because for me, entrepreneurship was a way to help people. If there was another way to help people, I'd probably be doing something else. And maybe the best way to say it is to help people at scale. Does that make sense? Instead of just like a one-to-one, how do I take my effort within myself, my community, my neighbors, my clients, and how do I help as many people at scale? And so I'll give a little bit of that background. As you alluded to, I live in York, Pennsylvania right now. So if anyone knows what a peppermint patty is, that's how most people know us. But we were also kind of the first capital of the United States, did all this amazing stuff in World War II. But I'm originally from Springfield, Massachusetts. And when I was 8, my family decided to become missionaries. So I actually grew up in the United Kingdom, so England, Ireland, Scotland. If you were to meet my dad, entrepreneur would not enter your mind at all. And that's, I think, where I get that idea of that purpose being kind of that driver that pushes you through. Because my dad is not that type of a person. Like if you were to meet him, and hopefully one day, Rodney, you will get a chance to meet him. He's a great guy. Everybody loves my dad, but he is not like me as like the quintessential entrepreneur. It really was just for him. It was this purpose and mission that was driving him. So as I was growing up, I was watching my dad, who wasn't this CEO, executive, super charismatic on stage, like inspiring lots of people. His heart was just so closely tied to this purpose that he believed no matter what, if he did not give everything that he had, there would be people left behind. And so for me, that was something that was drilled very, very deep into me that I honestly didn't realize was there until I kind of stumbled into entrepreneurship much later in my life. Now, when I came back when I was 18, I came back from the United Kingdom on my own. I'd always kind of felt disconnected. Like, I learned a lot in England. And, when I was growing up, it was kind of like the Brit pop, Brit rock invasion. So it was Oasis and Blur. And so, I mean, it was a great time to be in England, but I never really felt like I belonged. So when I came back to the United States, one of the first things I did was join the Marine Corps. So when I was in college, I wanted to serve my country, feel connected to something deeper than myself. So honestly, my first experience of what I thought America was like was the United States Marine Corps. Right. And so I thought, oh, it's people from all different backgrounds. Your skin color doesn't matter. You're all in it together. I mean, you're willing to die for someone that you don't even like. It wasn't until I got back out of the Marine Corps that I realized that that wasn't what the world was like, especially at that time. Now, fast forward to where we are now, and I'm sure we're going to get into it a little bit more, but those divisions, I thought the United States was out of many one, and now it's out of many more. And so that's like, that is terrifying me a little bit as well. But so that was kind of that beginning of the purpose coming from my dad, but the discipline and the ability to achieve and go after a mission came from the Marine Corps. So that was really kind of the beginnings of, I think, those two worlds coming together that led me to who I am today.
It's so wonderful because I think again, the sort of the overplay, both in AI and in entrepreneurship of you got to follow your passion. You hear this a lot, right? It's very empty, but you're just saying stay on your purpose, and we can all have good days and bad days with passion, but we often don't stay with that North Star. So that North Star was drilled into you. Maybe let's take it a little bit forward in terms of some of the work and thinking that you've brought forward from there to here in your work in AI, and why, what is AI in regards to this background, and what are you trying to achieve and not leaving people behind in this era of AI?
Yeah, I think that's a great jumping point because my story, obviously, we've talked about this a ton and gone into our backgrounds, and we could talk for hours. But what I'll do is I'll fast forward from like kind of with the Marine Corps. I got married very young, not married anymore. I like jumped out of planes and blowing things up. That was not the life she wanted, and so I gave it up. And I was a professional musician, a bounty hunter. I mean, I've done a whole bunch of things, and she was a photographer at the time. And I ended up actually being a photographer with my ex-wife. Husband and wife teams were very, very trendy. Now, this was my first step into like traditional entrepreneurship, right? So where I was starting to cut my teeth, it was in the town I live in right now, York, Pennsylvania. But I saw a new generation of photographers coming up, and this is something that I've been very good at, seeing these curves before they get there. And it's also where I've got this philosophy that I don't think the future, we're so skills focused in the United States. The future is not going to belong to the people that can grab onto something as fast as possible. It's the people that are willing to let go. And I say that a lot, that the future, this isn't the beginning of AI, it's the end of everything before. And so this was like kind of, a pattern through my life of like embracing something, running after it with everything I've got, but then being presented with new information, going, oh, I guess I'm the one that needs to change. But this was kind of that first time where instead of getting angry at the next generation of photographers, my immediate response was, well, I can't stop these guys any more than the old rich white, male photographers could have stopped us. So instead of me fighting them, I need to find a way to help. And so that was my first step into entrepreneurship as it related to technology. Now, I didn't know anything about tech. My town, very similar to other Rust Belt communities. First industrial revolution, we did great. Second industrial revolution, we thrived. Third, something interesting happened. The same entrepreneurs that had started these businesses that became the cornerstones of our communities passed it off to their kids. And so we went from risk taker communities to caretaker communities. And that's very similar. Lots of little Rust Belt towns, you'll see it. They have foundations, old industrial families, but like, no jobs, empty downtowns. And so I became obsessed with this idea that we had missed the third industrial revolution, like computers, the internet, mobile, but what was coming in the fourth, and this is, 15, 20 years ago. I mean, back when, we talked how you were seeing things decades ago that everybody else kind of wasn't paying attention to. I saw that same thing and became obsessed with this concept of we have haves and have nots, but we may have haves and have nevers. And so for me, that was my imperative of starting my first technology company. Now, when I did that, I knew nothing about it. I read the Lean Startup. We built an MVP. Again, I was kind of learning the vernacular. Luckily for me, two towns over, so in Lancaster, there were a couple founders that had had big exits, and they decided to create their own tech ecosystems. And it was very much like I'm sure you've seen this before, where a lot of the folks there, they say they're entrepreneurs, but they're really entrepreneurs, and they're at these meetups and things like that, saying they're working on their businesses, but really they're just kind of talking. I got up. I was asked to talk about what we were working on. We had a minimum viable product. It actually had users, and the two guys in the room were like, "This is actually viable." Like we'd kind of stumbled onto this thing that solved a social problem. I won't get too deep into it, but from their perspective, and back then it was all about funding, deal flow, venture capital was something that could bring money into the community. So they told me, all right, well, you got to raise money. And, I'd never raised money before. I had no idea. And they said, got to go to Silicon Valley, got to go to New York. Right. And so this was my first experience in the Valley, right? Silicon Alley, Silicon Valley. Now, had a chance to pitch to a lot of, very early investors in Facebook, stuff like that. Everybody got what we were doing, but they all said, there's no way we're going to invest in you in York, Pennsylvania. You're not going to be able to raise a Series A. You won't be able to hire the talent you need, which at the time was actually true. Now, obviously, things are changing now, which is one of the things I'm excited. This technology is accessible to all of us. but I really wanted nothing to kind of do with that culture. I was committed to my community, so I came back, and if we have time, I can talk about it. But I found a way to activate dormant capital within my community. Like it turns out that while my community was kind of decimated, we didn't have a lot of jobs. We had a couple families that had billions of dollars, like old industrial families, hundreds of millions. Like we don't know this, but there's like this wealth in these multi-generational families that care about these communities, but before have been activated to fund things like baseball stadiums, right? Or art view, like art galleries, things like that, right? But I found a way to mobilize this capital in a way that could actually kickstart our downtown. And now the story is a little meandering, but truthfully, I was able to get about $500,000 in funding. We were the first funded tech startup in York, Pennsylvania, but I kind of hit that ceiling, right? While this was happening, and this is, I think, the dark side of purpose and mission when it's unchecked, is I made all the mistakes you could as an entrepreneur the first time. I mean, I destroyed my marriage. And quite frankly, like towards the end, I was not a very good husband. That's the dark side of the mission and purpose. And I'm sure you've maybe experienced this or with some of your friends is you get so deep into doing good that sometimes you do bad to the people you care about the most. And so that's been something that's also in my head, right? Which is where I was like, yeah, I'm not really an entrepreneur first. I am a mission driven, purpose driven person first. And I've actually surrounded myself with people that can help keep me in check with that. But I ended up sunsetting that company and it was devastating. I'm not a quitter. Like that's not my personality. But interestingly enough, when I went back to the funders, they were amazed I kept going. And they said, and this is not our culture. We are a German Dutch honor culture. They said, well, when you have another idea, come back. And I went, like, I thought they were going to run me out of town, right? But instead they said, okay, well, find something else, come back. Now, this was my realization that, not being in the valley, having experienced that where you could talk things into existence, and even if it was something, the Uber for cupcakes, I'm going to change the world. I was seeing those kinds of things get funded where I was trying to do in my town, but I knew software was kind of visible. Like we just weren't that culture. You need to see, feel, touch it. And so I thought, all right, well, if we're not good at this, like we're not going to be the next Twitter, what are we good at? Manufacturing. Like we still had a very robust manufacturing supply chain. Went all the way back before the defense era. We're the first capital of the United States. And so I started going through factories and I fell in love with what humans and machines together could create. This was kind of the beginning of robotics. Like the first time I saw like, oh, this collaboration between machines and humans, we could do amazing things. And we do. Like, I didn't know how we got this or any of the other things around us. You kind of lose that sense of awe. And I think that's also a challenge of where we're at. And maybe we can talk about that a little bit later. But once I made that decision to go through these factories and say, all right, let's embrace what we're good at, I came to the conclusion robots. Robots are just machines. We're very, very good at building machines. But I also became terrified because it was an aging workforce and empty machines. Like there were no kids coming into manufacturing. There was all of this knowledge in like one person that knew how to fix this machine. So now I became obsessed with something different. Was like, okay, there was a new problem that I was seeing that I needed to fix if we were going to move into the fourth industrial revolution. Luckily for me, Pittsburgh is not too far from where I'm at. And in the 80s, Pittsburgh doubled down on robots. So the National Robotics and Engineering Center, Carnegie Mellon, I kind of hacked my way into there and I got a chance to see humanoid robots and like, the very early self-driving cars. But they all said, listen, it's almost here, but not quite yet. Yeah, and I knew from being like too early before that if I came back to York and started talking about robots, they were going to run me out of town. And so I thought, all right, got to bide my time. So that's where I got into real estate but more economic development type. I was a co-founder in a company called Royal Square. We bought a city block to start King, Queen, Duke, and Princess Street. And everyone just started calling us Royal Square. So we went with it. And then over the course of about the next 2 years, we acquired all of that city block. We went from doing $100,000 projects to $1 million to like 12 million to 25. Bought all of Main Street, and we became this strange focal point of millennials building for millennials. That's what they called us. We activated more dormant capital. Pretty soon, we were attracting the governor's attention, and that was it was a heck of a ride. But it was my first intersection between the beginning was seeing my dad and being this kind of very purpose driven, getting the discipline to fulfill the mission. That drive came from the Marines, But this was, and then transitioned into technology to understand that power, but also all the flaws in the current system that I saw in Silicon Valley and Silicon Alley. And then my first step into kind of physical placemaking, that actually seeing, oh, wait a minute, I can blend these things together to provide homes, like a sense of belonging. And with your background in neuroscience, maybe we can get into this unpacking me a little bit later. But that constantly moving around, and also growing up with this idea that heaven is the ultimate place, this desire to build a home or maybe bring some of that so people feel valued and a part of things, that kind of placemaking, that was kind of that intersection. And then next I move into robotics, but maybe we could dive a little bit into what you're seeing, this concept of the blending of the technology, bringing it down. How do we make it real for people? And then maybe we can pick up with the robotics and some of the new stuff I'm
Yeah.
doing.
So John, I mean, I think what's so wonderful about what and also really important for the audience to hear is the blending. But I would say how York lives inside of you. How that, and it's not just York itself, but that sort of township, that sort of place that has been forgotten or just not built up, and
Yeah,
and then being able to continue that push, and the discipline required to see the value where other people aren't seeing it, in
yeah,
people, in technology, and then bringing that together and then saying, oh my God, these are two broken pieces. Most people would walk away at that point, right? Like you
yeah,
call it, like empty machines, and people that are really don't have the knowledge, or it's being passed on to another generation. And so this idea of not being discouraged, I think, is a big part of your story. Sure, you've pivoted, and sure, you've gone on, and you continue to go on, and we'll talk about that. But I think in today's, uh, I'll say more machine learning, AI, and large language models, the whole kind of larger ecosystem, is that I think a lot of people are not doing this work. They're allowing these generalized models, or they're allowing the large tech companies, as much as they may not like them and much as they feel sort of overwhelmed by I'll call it the tech bros, or just that sort of pressure.
yeah,
They are not putting the pieces on the local level together. That actually is incredibly meaningful. I saw I now I forget where this was coming from, but it was a stat of how public perception has changed in terms of, is AI kind of middle of the road okay? Is AI, are they excited about it, or are they very not excited? Do they find it
right.
dangerous? And that sort of last category has really risen. I mean,
Yeah,
that negative tracking of people's perception of AI, because they haven't put themselves, nor do they feel empowered to put themselves in this sort of puzzle maker role that you have, where you see pieces and you have the motivation to talk to people and really make it happen. And that's kind of that self-empowerment we really need. And you're such a great
yeah.
example of that. And so it might be just, I mean, I would love to talk to you a little bit more about that whole manufacturing piece, because in areas of manufacturing, people just think it's too big for me to participate in. I can't
Right.
I can't possibly innovate there, right? That's the big kahunas. I mean, they have all these supply chains. They're all sewn up and
Yeah.
all of this. So the
Can't just
fact
move fast and break stuff.
and you
Like you
can't
can't do it from a closet in Silicon Valley.
yeah, exactly. So it's either too big or too automated or too something for so-called the little guy or any of us to really plug into and make a difference. And so I'm really interested, and maybe you can articulate this a little bit more, is kind of how you handled that manufacturing piece a little further, and
Yeah.
perhaps where you saw some of the automations or AI come into that. And because
Yeah.
those communities haven't totally left manufacturing.
No, it's coming back in a lot of ways.
Yeah, I
Like
would
it's
love to hear part of that story of that coming back.
Yeah. Yeah. So I think this is a good place to pick this up. And then maybe later, and I'd love from your perspective as a neuroscientist, I have thoughts on like why I am the way that I am. So I'd love to dive into that a little bit later.
Sure,
But
sure.
we'll pick it up at that point. And quite frankly, unfortunately for me, but fortunately now, I was not only one of the founders of the real estate company. We were growing very, very quickly, but I was also the chief communications officer. And about 10 years ago, probably is 10 years ago, this last January or February, I started seeing the inklings of AI and robotics. The curve, right? Like I could see it. It been growing, and now it's going to go straight up. And I started sounding the alarm, and all of my partners and everyone in the community thought I'd lost my mind. So I was proceeded to be kicked out of my company, went from being worth $5 million to nothing overnight, and I had no idea what I was going to do. It was actually the first time, and real estate is a different thing, especially if you've been in tech. But real estate is this physical thing that
Yeah.
generates revenue. You can borrow against it, like all this. And my family had never had that, so it represented stability. And then as soon as it was all taken away, this is what got me even more obsessed with this future, is that no matter how stable you think you are, something can take it away. And I had to go through, I think, that feeling of loss, which also drove me because it was kind of a more of an esoteric concept of I don't want people to be left behind. But now I had everything taken away in one moment that kind of reinvigorated that desire to be like, no, wait a minute, this could happen to everybody. Like it's such a unique experience for entrepreneurs, but it won't be soon. If we do this wrong, like this will be a shared human experience. So that kind of built that fire again in me. And I hate to say it because it wasn't healthy, but the next day I was supposed to speak in front of our governor at a big conference. It was our PETA conference, which is like our state kind of economic development governors conference. And I was supposed to talk about the work we were doing at Royal Square. Instead, I drank a bottle of whiskey the night before, rewrote the presentation completely, made it all about robotics and AI, tied it back to World War II, went to get on stage, handed them a flash drive, and they said, well, what is this? I was like, my presentation. They're like, what are you going to talk about? I was like, robots. And they were like, do not talk about robots. And I'm like, too late. Took the microphone, got on stage. So I gave this the whole economic development conference was about placemaking for millennials. And here's me talking about AI and robotics 10 years ago. The governor's white as a ghost. Like everybody's freaking out. But one lady, her name was Maureen Sharkey. She came up and said, hey, I'm on the board of a conference coming up, just a small conference. I think it was in Peoria, Illinois or somewhere. She goes, would you come to my town and tell this story? And I was like, sure. I was unemployed. I think I had like $500 in the bank. Didn't know how I was going to pay my mortgage. None of it. And she goes, we'll pay you. And I was like, you'll pay me? How much? And she goes, is $2,000 enough? I was like, to talk for 20 minutes? Done. And so I found myself in like this little town talking to people, very much like people from New York, scaring everybody. But one person came up and said, I'm the economic development director or chamber head 2 towns over. Would you come tell that story? Now, I ended up in this terrible non compete with my previous company. So for 2 years, I couldn't do anything in New York. And I stumbled from town to town doing speaking engagements. Like I started to learn, okay, wait a minute. Maybe I just wasn't communicating it correctly before. And so I grew out my beard. I leaned more into like my military background because before we all kind of looked trendy and like we were in a band. And I thought, wait a minute. If I'm really going to bring technology to Main Street and find a way, this can't be about me. It has to be about everybody else. And so for those 2 years, I crisscrossed. And funnily enough, every time someone would ask me, I'd be like 3,000. And I'm thinking I'm running the greatest grift of all time. I didn't know people got paid to speak. Like this was a whole new world, especially because I was a touring musician where we got paid in beer more than anything. And so for these 2 years, I somehow became the technical futurist to middle America. Like I was the guy you would call for rural communities or third tier cities. And before I knew it, I was doing governors conferences, 10,000 person events, ended up signing with an agency in New York, and ended up being a keynote for President Obama a couple times for President Trump, all around this. How do we include everybody that's been left out? Now, after those 2 years were up, I came back to York, and I am in an afternoon. I founded York Exponential, which was my previous robotics company, all around this idea that in robotics, it was all about how many people can you get rid of. And I was like, this is the wrong way to do this. We need to have a human-centered robotics company. Brought in 30 engineers from all over the world, raised about $4 million in an afternoon, tried to work with the local college to get them to start training regular people in robotics and AI, because that was my philosophy was right now we need lots of programmers, but soon we're going to need people that are good with their hands, people like us. And they didn't get it. So out of pure frustration, I founded the world's first licensed college for robot mechanics. It's called the Fortress Academy. It's still licensed, still here. It was the first of its kind in the world. And worked with our local YMCA to turn an old bank into the school building. So we raised about $1.5 million for that. And I took control of the center of our city, and we were building the world's first innovation district where humans and robots would live side by side. Because exposure, right? Talking about something that's invisible is hard, but if touch, see, feel. And this is where I kind of learned, I think the way what you were asking is like how to get people involved and break it down. My goal was to bring back this plan from World War II called the York Plan, and it was adopted by the whole nation. And my idea was, whereas in World War II, we pivoted everything to make defense, right now, robots were made overseas. All the parts were made in China. I viewed that as a national security issue. I was able to frame it in a way that we need an American made robotics ecosystem. In Pittsburgh, we have the greatest minds, but in Central PA, we have the greatest hands. And so that was my concept. And when I first brought it to the community of manufacturers, I said, we should build robots. They thought I might as well be on Mars until I broke the robots down into all their basic components. I didn't say they were robots, and I went to manufacturers and said, how many of these could you build and how fast? And they were like, oh, I could build 1,000 of those. You can get them by next month. And pretty soon, when you took this thing that seemed incredibly complex, but you broke it down to the fundamental building blocks that I knew that person could do, at the end, I brought them all back together and said, robot, we can build robots. And so that breaking down of everything started to make sense. The community got incredibly excited. Governor Wolf, who saw me those many years before, funded us with $6 million. We landed one of the largest defense companies in the world as our anchor tenant, and ended up getting $500,000 in funding. I think it was $500,000 from the governor to start training the first generation of robot mechanics. All of a sudden, the pandemic hits. Everything goes upside down, right? So that resilience, like that idea of like that fire being put back into me and hitting this moment. Now, I would like to say, and I think this is, something we can dive into a little bit later. I would like to say that the combination of the purpose, the mission, the discipline all kept me going, but I fell into a massive depression. Like probably the deepest depression. I've had a couple moments, right? Like there's been some things, but that was different because I still had to operate. And as I pivoted to try and save my company, because the one thing I thought is robots don't get sick, manufacturing's coming back. It's all of the things I thought was like that we were preparing for, but instead of embracing it and using this time of evolution and metamorphosis and like saying this is what we were preparing for, everyone went backward. People got paid to stay home. We fed AI like 10 years and 2 years. All of a sudden we lived online in a way that like the echo chambers got stronger and stronger and stronger. And my engineers didn't want to be here anymore. As soon as I had to save my company, my projects started getting taken over by different people. They destroyed it. And, I'm going to be honest, I don't really go downtown very much anymore because, to see that empty building and to see just coffee shops going up where I was going to build kind of the future of York became really depressing. Now I had to save my company, and I ended up saving it by doing some very creative things in AI, 3D scanning. We had embraced the metaverse very early. We were using remote engineering workforces. I set up supply chains in other countries. But quite frankly, I was becoming the thing I hated. Like I was getting very, very good at putting in robots that replace people. And I was making more and more money, but the mission tank was getting emptied. I'd see my bank account going up, and it just like it didn't seem to matter at all. Like and so I started looking, thinking, well, maybe I've got to find fulfillment in other places. And one of the interesting things that happened though, ChatGPT comes out. All of a sudden, everyone that I talked to over the last 10 years were like, where's that robot guy that was talking about this? And so then I was getting called back out again. So that was another realization that one of the things that gives me so much fuel is not the money, and it isn't just the mission. It's seeing the light bulbs go off with people, like people getting excited and realizing, like you said earlier, I can participate. I may not know where, and I may not know how this works, but I know it's important. And that was the first time I'd experienced it every room I went in. Before it was kind of a fringe, but ChatGPT, and as you know, and I'm sure your listeners, was like this bomb that went off, right? It just expanded so quickly. When this happened at one of the events I spoke at, one of the C-levels wife was actually a host of an NPR show called The Spark here in Pennsylvania. They asked me to come on, and from doing this, and this is how we got connected, a little bit backstory for your listeners, I got asked to host a television show on PBS where I had a chance to speak to folks like you and like the priest that was the advisor to the Pope and like all the way to like the Homeland Security director, like to people that were high up in the CIA, to the folks over at Colossal Ben who's resurrecting extinct species, to have this ability to like all of the questions that I stayed up at night thinking about, to talk to folks like you and dive at a level that I had not seen the depth before. And one of the things, and I think we've experienced this in our conversations and especially that interview, was one of the things that got me so excited is when an interviewee would say, I've never thought about that. And that would get us in these deep, deep conversations that would just open up all of these other things and, quite frankly, lead to friendships like we have right now. And so that gave me this excitement again. It also, honestly, it was one of the most difficult things I had to do because the things that were still running in York were the replacing people. It was just a business, but it wasn't about that community, right? And so that was, for me, it was very, very difficult to make that decision. And, I thank you for the conversations we've had with this idea of like, no, there's a lot of people that need to be helped. And to take the things that I've learned, but now realize that while this technology has the power to divide us, it's the first time the same technology that has this destructive power has the same amount of power, if not more, to bring us together. And so that's led me into kind of my next vision and mission in the next phase of my life is how do I take all of the things I've learned and help as many people as possible as I can? And that's where like some of these next level discussions came with, and thank you for your guidance and just friendship through that personal transition for myself.
Yeah, John. I mean, I think you know this, and if you don't, I think this discussion and you're expressing yourself is evidence of that. You're an inspiration.
Well,
Yeah, and I say this in this regard, is all the struggles and certainly coming out of the dark hole that you were in terms of depression. You're really honest about it. I think the things that we miss in more, I'll call it a Silicon Valley kind of ethos, is that, it's all about what did I raise? It's all about,
right.
when I had my exit, and none of these other things you're talking about come into play. And so there's a sort of barrenness. It's like a desert of innovation that really is not necessarily about people. I see often, some of the great names, I don't need to even describe them, but some of the great names out there that everyone knows that are behind, singularity and so many other terms that are now like household names. Those terms really, and those people behind them, to me, feel more disconnected than ever because they're not talking about not just the people left behind, but a big chunk of humanity that actually might not have a job or
Yeah.
even have a chance for meaningful
Yeah.
work and
Purpose.
and its
They may have
purpose. Yeah,
feel like they have no purpose.
yeah, and so they may have a job, but it won't be purpose driven or it won't have that kind of sense that get us up in the morning. And
Yeah.
that is seems to be completely empty in a lot of this sort of boosterism, this sort of
Yeah.
rah that's out there that I'm not hearing at all with your journey. And I think your journey for the audience is a journey of success and falling on your face and getting back up and falling on your face and getting back up, and that is the human story. And it's also a story about our economy,
Yeah.
particularly our AI economy, which is that we're expected to innovate and then fall on our face and pick ourselves back up. But what's happening is that we're picking ourselves back up and the rug's being pulled from under us by big tech.
Yeah.
And so we are building that next really great sort of intelligent API or agent-based systems, but most of it's dependent on the large models. And so us owning those models and customizing those models, that's actually my next guest today, is how she built really her own LLM, and that LLM and how that is actually can operate off the grid, so it has its own
Yeah.
power source and all of that. So
Oh, I'd love to talk with her.
yeah,
Let's
yeah,
keep those
it's
connections
I'll
going.
I'll put you together. But that idea of for her too, and for you, and for our audience, is that your journey is not in any book. It's not in any entrepreneur course or incubator. It is really something that people need to hear, and I really am very interested in like your next piece here. I should say your next little step that you're going to go with us. Like where has this led today?
Yeah, so this is, this transition for me, and I think you're right. Like this idea of like personal ownership. I know for you, empathetic AI like is so big for me. One of the things that I noticed is going through all of this, there was also a redefining of words. That was the first thing that I discovered there was a disconnect, right? Like as soon as words like community meant your users, there was this disconnect where they weren't actual people. They were data points. And the reality is, especially when we talk about things like, abundance, like I love abundance. I mean, I would make the argument we've been in an age of abundance. We could have solved hunger. We could have solved homelessness if we wanted to, if the incentive was there. And so I believe we're in an age of abundance. But when you're talking to a single mother in one of these towns that I work in who maybe has come from an abusive relationship is trying to figure out how to start again. She's got 3 children, maybe doesn't have a higher education. This is a real story. I do a lot of work with Goodwill and I hear this. And you're telling her that one day we're going to cure all disease. And she's like, I don't know how I'm going to feed my family next week. Like that is a disconnect that if you want people, an us versus them, that is how you create this, right? Is you talk about this abstract, we're trying to solve the AI alignment problem. And it's like, how can you solve the AI alignment problem if we don't first solve the human alignment problem? Because we're both humans. You're the one building the model. I'm the one you're getting the data from. And we're not even using the same words. Like we need something completely different. And that kind of aha moment for me was this, okay, I'm very good at building physical spaces. Like I'm a systems level thinker. Like how does this technology that is abstract work with a hardware that then interacts with a person? Like that building and then placemaking, like all of that comes together. But if we don't solve this human alignment problem, the AI alignment problem, we will never solve. And quite frankly, as we've scraped the Western internet, like you and I talked about this, like I don't think we're building artificial intelligence. I think we're building artificial Western intelligence. And we will hit artificial Western general intelligence first because it is on all of our data. Now, and I look at the internet, that is not the best of us. Like social media, it is a rage engine. I mean, even people like you would never talk that way to someone in real life, although I am starting to see that now. Like you see interactions with people where you're like, wait a minute, this is like a chat room. Like these people have become their online characters that before you would never imagine. But if AI thinks that's what humans are and that's what humans want, is it any like surprise that these models are giving us what it thinks we want? And that's where like this concept of Cervidium, which I think is kind of my next push into how I want to combine this, what artificial intelligence should be doing. Like I'm not trying to compete with an open AI, Google, Gemini, none of those. Like they're all moving that direction. What I want is the conscience of artificial intelligence. Like this idea that if you're a Christian, your family's AI should have your morals. If you're Jewish, if you're agnostic, if you're a Muslim, like because right now the AI thinks this is humanity and it is the worst of us. So we need an AI that is actively working to understand us as a country, a community, a neighborhood, a family, an individual, so that we can help understand each other. Like because that's what we're missing right now is the ability to even understand or communicate. We speak the same language but seem to have drastically different meaning, and I don't see how we have any kind of semblance of any society or civilization if we cannot even talk to each other as family members. And so that's what Cervidium is. The goal is to have this AI that is passed down through your family, that has not just the ability to know you intimately. And so like you may quickly meet somebody that's completely different background. Maybe the chance of miscommunication is high, but there's an AI that can quickly talk to their AI and go, okay, John, you're about to get in this taxi ride. This is a good example. It's called the Persian taxi driver problem. I don't know if you've ever heard this, but a lot of the large language models are failing at this. And I look at it and it's like, well, that's easy. Just give it to the Persian taxi driver. Don't try to push it from the top. And for your listeners that don't know this, it's when you go to that part of the world and you have a Persian taxi driver, if you're from the West, At the end of the ride, the taxi driver is going to say, no, 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 my friend, it's a gift. And he's going to say that 3 times. Now, if you don't know, you're just going to think people in that part of the world are really, really friendly. And you have inadvertently turned that taxi driver that he might not pick up people from the West anymore. So immediately that barrier is there. What else is he going to do? Tell the other taxi drivers when they start their jobs that no, 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 that's what Westerners are like. The easiest way to solve that is the minute I get in, my AI that knows my cultural background. Again, it's not like my data or my likes when it comes to what type of food I like or anything. It's something deeper into like who I am, can rapidly communicate with theirs. Again, not sharing data, but giving me a heads up and go, hey, John, this person is from this part of the world. They're going to say no at the end. Make sure that you go through it because it's a sign of mutual respect and thank them this particular way. Or you see online, I don't know if you've ever been to Japan. I see like people with their phones, videos trying to chase geishas. And I'm like, geishas aren't novelties in the Japanese culture. Not to mention the fact they're like feeder bound, so they can't run away. And you see people from America like, oh, no, 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 and trying to push their kids in. There should be an AI, Servidium, that goes, hey, John, take a step back. That's not cool. Like what you're doing is actually incredibly offensive. If you'd like to ask, do it this way. That is what's missing with AI systems. They're just answer machines, right? That it very often are even answering the questions we're not even really asking. But this concept of having us be able to understand each other at a critical moment when we speak the same language and can't even communicate with each other, that's the thing that I think is missing right now. And so that blending of like, okay, how do we find this value? Maybe a good way to view it is, yeah, we may have lots of data and we may have lots of knowledge, but we don't have wisdom. And
Yeah.
the amount of power that is in these systems and the lacking of the wisdom makes me terrified for what these systems will be if wisdom is not centered to it. Does that make sense?
Makes a whole lot of sense, John. Um, Maybe for our listeners, the idea of what Cervidium actually is. I mean, you've talked about it conceptually, and I think it's really important. Um, is it a company? Is it an organization? Is it a concept? And how does it unfold?
Yeah, so Cervidium itself it will end up being an artificial intelligence company. And don't again, we're not trying to compete with a Google, we're not trying to compete with an OpenAI. View it like when you go to buy something organic and it has like a non-GMO label. We want Cervidium inside. Like that concept of it being like, hey, you know that there is a safeguard that is going to care about you, care about your family. And, it can make all kinds of like connections with other AIs. We don't really care about any of that. I'm trying to solve that particular problem. But we've also viewed this as a very unique time period, right? I mean, I don't know, and maybe we can talk about this, how far you think artificial general intelligence is, artificial super intelligence, but clearly we have some kind of window, right, between this narrow intelligence and as these models are getting smarter to something that is going to surpass us in all kinds of capabilities we have. So I think we've got this tiny window. So the way we view Cervidium is it's a big, it's a big problem to solve, but we want to divide it up into these very specific chunks that people can participate. So we have this concept of what we view as our sentinel organizations, right? Right now we have the nonprofit world is very often a nonprofit pops up to solve some kind of problem. Sentinels are different. Sentinels have 3 Ps. One is to prevent the problem, right? So we see it coming, and it's without me realizing I was building sentinel organizations. Like, robots weren't everywhere, but I believed they were going to be. Manufacturing hadn't collapsed, but I believe it had. So all of the organizations I was creating was to either prevent, if you can't prevent it, to prepare, but at the center had prosperity. Like this idea that out of these two things, we have a time period. And a sentinel may pop up to do prevent, prepare, and prosper, and then it may disappear. Quite frankly, that may be the future of work. I mean, it's hard for us to wrap our heads around this, that you may learn how to do a thing, and then within 6 months, that company is no longer necessary. I mean, I think that is going to shake venture capital, the Silicon Valley model. So it has to be driven by these purpose engines. That's what we're calling it, a purpose engine. And so one of the first verticals that we're launching is something called S6. So from a neuroscientist perspective, I'd love to get your feedback. But most people don't know this, that, they think there's 5 stages of grief, right? And you get through the 5, and the last is acceptance. There's actually 6 stages of grief, and very few people meet it. It's finding purpose or meaning in the loss, right? Someone like a Michael J. Fox or Christopher Reeves, like they have something happen to them, and they put all of their resource now into preventing it from happening to other people. That is defining purpose and meaning in the loss. And that doesn't exist right now. Like acceptance seems to be like the best we can hope for. But in a world where you said it, there's people that are building a very distinct future that some of it may be, okay, well, you're going to get paid to stay home. You're going to have food. You're going to have a house, but you're not going to have purpose. So put on a headset. Like that, that is not meaning in the loss. That is escapism. But if we can find a way to be leveraging technologies like this to help people find meaning and purpose in the loss and unite with others that, and again, this isn't entrepreneurs. Like these are regular people that like my dad, that have this deep belief. Like my dad, terrible at business. Like he wasn't great at jobs, but you tie a purpose to it, and my dad was willing. In fact, he never took money from any of the people in the United Kingdom because when we moved in the 90s, it was the televangelists were stealing all the money. So my dad delivered pizzas. He never took money. Now, how good of an entrepreneur is that? There was no business model. There was no scaling. There was no mailbox money. It was just purpose, purpose, purpose. But we were alone. Like we were isolated. One of the things I learned from the Marine Corps, and I learned this about myself, I would never be a sniper. Like, don't want to do it because you're on your own. I always wanted to be a Navy SEAL because you can go through anything when you're going through it together. And that I think is what's disconnected, right? We've got these people controlling all of the AI and we've got everybody else. But man, if we could come together as a true community, as compatriots, like people around, united purpose and mission. So like that single mom I talked about who came from an abusive relationship, maybe the first part of purpose and her mission will be to partner with others to solve a very specific problem. But then all of a sudden, we start to expand that. So maybe at the beginning, it's the single moms coming from abusive relationships in rural communities. And then there's others in urban environments that maybe they don't connect on anything else. They have completely different backgrounds, political beliefs, you name it. But that shared human experience, we start to come a little closer and a little closer and a little closer. So instead of the AI ripping apart the fabric, it starts to reweave it at an accelerated rate. But that concept of like a purpose engine that we may not have jobs in the future, we may just have purpose and mission, and these sentinels will rise, come down. The closest thing I could find was like DARPA, the way DARPA was funded, and we ended up with the internet and all of these other things. DARPA kind of had that same like project model, like pilots, people that led these initiatives, and then you were a part of the DARPA network, and then they went on to create all kinds of amazing things, but had that mission at its core. So like a DARPA for the prosperity of humanity, something like that should be maybe what we're moving into. Now after
Yeah.
AGI, super intelligence, I don't know,
Yeah.
but we've
So,
got
so
we got to
John,
win that.
yeah, so we have a few minutes, but I want to just say that it's a question, kind of statement question. So, question is, are you helping as a mentor to develop more Johns? Um, and then secondly, because if we think about a missionary or someone that's very mission driven, they're trying to bring up the next generation, right? It's just in your DNA. So that's one question. And how are you maybe approaching that? And then the other is what kind of signals are you getting on the ground of people's perception of working with what when they hear the word AI? And I'm talking about people more along the lines you're describing, that may see it as evil, may see it as good, may see it as, or just not have any thoughts or feelings about it. What are those signals now versus, say, 5 years ago? So those are
Yeah.
kind of
So
two things.
so the first thing is I've one of the things that and having to unpack like again all of the reasons I am the way that I am. I'm If I had been born 10 years earlier, I would not be useful. And if I'd been born 10 years later, I would not be useful. I seem to just right now, this mix of my experience and what's coming together makes me valuable, but I'm going to be candid with you. Like, I want to rest. Like, I want to give it everything that I've got and then have a family. Like, I put off that. We lost a baby and there was a lot of things. And, I had the realization that if I was going to give to my community and give everything that I had, I can't be divided. I tried it and it was, people I loved were hurt. And so I kind of made that decision. And in the back of my head, that's still like, I want to have a family. And luckily for me, because of longevity technology, and who knows, maybe we'll live to 150, we'll be traveling to Mars, like all kinds of crazy stuff, which I'm super excited about. But it also gives me that perspective of, okay, I can still have a family. I can give everything I've got. But quite frankly, if I bring a family into the world, I want it to be a world that they want to be in. So that's kind of that first thing. So the idea of finding other Johns honestly has been difficult. The one thing I have found is
I meant to
my
cultivate other Johns.
right. And so the one thing that I've found that's unique is, especially, and it's unique. It's coming out of strange places like other ex-missionary kids or pastors' kids. People that maybe they grew up watching that, but and maybe have even left the church, but that mission they can't turn it off. Like they're a weird kind of entrepreneur. So it isn't necessarily finding more Johns. It might be finding a John for food security, like somebody that is so, like, I'm passionate about everybody, and I know, like, for everyone to have a great future, we have to tackle education. Like, I'm finding people that are like, that is the Servidium I want to build. And so they're coming under this with this concept of, like, they don't want to be like the dude like me trying to find a way to connect it all, but hunger. They watch somebody starve at one point in their life, and they are like the Servidium for food scarcity. There's others for, like, and hopefully I'll be able to talk about this a little bit more in maybe another episode, because we're making some announcements. There's another that watched people struggle within his community and not have homes, like lose their homes. The kind of the Servidium for homes, like that idea of, like, finding these people that have the same level of passion, but their purpose is different under the same umbrella of, like, making sure humans flourish. That's been the exciting thing, is like the message is resonating, and people are going, you know what? I don't want to do it the Silicon Valley way. I'm not looking for mailbox money. Now, maybe they have that ability to do that, but instead it's these, like, very specific parts of humanity that they're finding very, very passionate. And honestly, that's been one of the things, even with our discussions, like your desire for empathetic AI fits perfectly into the understanding. Like, empathy increases understanding and vice versa, to be connected to with, like, AI experts like you, that is your passion. Like, that is that piece. It's one of the things for the first time, and I guess this is when we'll pivot into kind of like how I feel with the people I'm talking to and some of the folks that I mentioned. It's the first time I don't feel alone. Like, I felt so isolated, like this voice in the wilderness. And it's the first time people with experience like you and your connections and, like, your capabilities are echoing things that I never heard from Silicon Valley. Like, it was, like I said, even the co-opting of words like community really just meant users. Like, this is the first time for me I feel like I'm hitting a self-feeding engine. Like, I'm connecting with people that are like, wait a minute, we can do this. Like, actually have a concept of, there's 1,000 unicorns in the United States right now, $1,000 billion plus companies. I have a concept of 10,000 unicorns. Well, if there's 1,000 right now going this direction, there has to be 10,000 of us working together with a different foundation that rewrites the rules of entrepreneurship and industrialization. So that's kind of the first piece. The second is, pre-chat GPT, for better or worse, this stuff just seemed so science fiction that very often I had to lean much heavier into fear to get people to do stuff. Like, it seemed like all the people that were excited about tech moved to Silicon Valley. In fact, the founder of Pinterest is from York, lives in Silicon Valley. And so, but this is the first time where ChatGPT, for better or worse, has changed the conversation that this is an inevitability. Like, this is, whether you think it's, you know, AGI or whatever, I think people are realizing that the tech now is having an impact faster than they can. So it's created more of a sense of urgency, where that single mom before was so disconnected is now like, what does this mean for my kids? Like, it's not an esoteric far away. So that's been motivating for me, is that people now want to get involved because they want a future for their children. It isn't just a business case. And funnily, we can maybe talk about this if we have time, and I don't know if we will. You and I talked about this recently because I got invited to go to Rome to participate in an event called the Builders Forum, which is all AI for good, and it's sponsored by the Vatican. And so it was, an honor to get invited. We'll get to see all kinds of crazy stuff. But recently, some folks from Silicon Valley, I guess, went to meet with the Pope, and he came away, the new Pope, Pope Leo, and he came away infuriated because I think they must have approached him like he was the CEO of a company, because they said, oh, well, we could create a digital twin of you. And then that way you won't have to answer all of these questions. And it's like, way to misunderstand the chair of the, like, the office of what that means. But like you were saying, like, I think it's like, it's so hard because entrepreneurship and venture capital and scaling is so tightly linked to this technology now that it's come away from academia and it's primarily Silicon Valley. Every problem is approached like a business problem, not a human problem. And that's been the exciting thing for me, is to see humans wanting to get involved, not so they can start companies, but so that they can help build and shape the future. Does that like, are you seeing that too?
Very much, John. I think we're going to end on that. Not that I want to end, but I think there's a part two, okay? Um, that I very much see that it's an urgency that we're building not just a human future, but we're building a future in which we want to live in. And we particularly want to build a future that our children want to live in. And our children are looking to us. They're also looking to each other. I have an
Right.
11-year-old daughter, and they're looking to each other, and they're seeing each other caught up in at some points, with too much screen time, too much
Right.
social media, and all of that. At the same time, they have this complete deep desire to be accepted, to accepting,
Yeah.
to be happy, to be joyful, to learn. And what I find often, and there's so much research on this, I just would say that that future that we'll talk about in part two is a learning future. And it's not a learning future like you hear where people are, you know, optimizing their learning, and it's all,
Right.
but it's a learning in which we may or may not have all the technologies around us to help us, but that we have to relearn from each other, not only what it means to be human, but what our true capabilities are, that starts to
Right.
get kind of squashed in relatively easy queries to ChatGPT and so forth, because those easy queries are not going to stop.
Oh yeah.
We're going to continue, there's going to be homework, put together, continued with ChatGPT, as well as, some really remarkable physics and a lot of, molecular engineering and discovery and things like that, which, these are great, good areas. But what we want to see is that generation that's excited, that is empowered to make that future for themselves, not just
Yeah.
accept it. Because I often feel, and I'm sure you do too, I often feel that I'm living in someone else's imagination. I
It's a
often,
movie. It
yeah,
feels like not real life almost.
yeah. I mean, but I'm grounded, so I have sharp teeth. I get angry. You do too. We have that stuff behind us, but our children may not.
Right.
They may not have developed that. So we want to build that future, and we'll talk about that future in part two, if that's okay.
Yeah.
All
Yeah,
right,
and
John.
I'd love to dive into the neuroscience behind this,
Yeah,
because we
we
talked
will.
about the technology, but it's like without us, that human alignment with the AI alignment. So I'd love to dive deep into that, because
We
I know your
will.
expertise is so you're an interesting combination of those two, and I've yet to find somebody else like you, Rodney. So I appreciate it.
Same on your side. So onwards we go. So thank you, John, from the bottom of my heart. Thank you for being here. Thank you for your story, but really for your life. I really appreciate it.
Well, it's my pleasure. Keep fighting the good fight, Rodney.
I
Can't wait to
will.
talk again.
You too. Take good care.